Hey James, welcome to Metavore.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be on here.
Yeah, thanks for coming. So you came to my attention originally because I was just on Instagram and I saw a piece of yours that it had like the cloud with the Gothic windows, and I was just like, wow. And I actually thought it was a composite photo at first, but I just found your work really beautiful, and so I've been following it since then. So I wanted to ask you, so to give some background on why I would have an artist on the Metavore podcast. Metavore is all about what we eat, drink, smell, the senses, and exploring, developing taste, trying new things. And I think a big part of that is art. It's kind of like food for the eyes. It sounds kind of cheesy, but I think there's some parallels there. So what I want to ask you is, what part do you think, what importance do you think art has in our lives, just as humans? And furthermore, for you personally as an artist, what do you feel is important to you when you're creating art, and what's your goal, so to speak?
Yeah, I'll start with the second question first. So I guess with every piece I've been trying to create, I really want to build an experience for the viewer and allow them just to escape the world for just that brief moment that they're experiencing my piece, especially now that everything's been super crazy with the virus.
Mm.
It's this moment of just relaxation or bliss that I can try to capture, at least ephemerally, with my work, so people can kind of experience that and then insert themselves into this world that I've created that's at times real, at times surreal. There's this blend that I try to exist at both of those boundaries. And yeah, just art as a whole, I mean, it's a way of telling stories in a very visual way. And there's just things that can be said without words, and just creating these pieces that can really guide you through a new universe and allow you to think of things that you would never experience before. It's really powerful, and it's really neat to be able to create these things and then share them with people. You don't need a language. I mean, it's a universal language to experience artwork. And so, yeah, it's just, for me, I'm trying my best to create my own little corner of the art world. And
Yeah, it's interesting. I look at your work and you strike me as, so wait, let me go ahead and plug your Instagram. So it's James_films.
Yep.
It's James Tralie. Is that right? Okay, James Tralie. Okay. So when I look at your work, what strikes me is that, as you talked about, you're trying to cultivate that mood, that, bring people into another world, that state of bliss. It definitely seems like you're more drawn to that almost surreal way of approaching art. And that's for anyone who doesn't know its work, it's actually CGI. It's actually created with computers. But when I first saw it, I thought it was composited, like some photographer had taken some photos. And that's coming from, I myself have done 3D work. So I was really impressed with the fact that at first I thought, oh, maybe that's, composite photos, but in fact it's CGI. And I think the ability you have with CGI is that you can actually, I mean, the sky is the limit, or actually the sky is not even the limit. I mean, nothing's the limit. You could create anything, and you still manage to ground it in reality, which is really cool. Because I think you can go so far that it's like you would have had to take a certain kind of drug to even understand what the art's doing. But your work, I like that anybody could see, okay, there's a foundation in reality, even if it's just a tiny bit, like just a window of a building or something, and then you build that fantastical world around it. And there's something really pleasing about that. And that, I think, is where I tend to be more interested in artists that do that sort of thing, because I think for me, and I know some people prefer the abstract, like where you're playing with form, and it does, I don't know. What do you think about that? Like there's an interesting thing where sometimes the art that sells the most these days, like if you were trying to, for example, make a living as a traditional fine artist today, and it seems like a lot of the almost the abstracter the better, right? Why do you think that is, that people are so drawn to
your splatters on a canvas? And I mean, people find form and meaning in that. And I mean, you can really do anything, like you're saying with art. There's no limits to it. But yeah, I do like kind of grounding it a bit more in reality. And I think that's where there's a lot of intrigue with that too, because it's a place that you can imagine, but it's just slightly off. And so having that kind of just minute of just, wait a second, what is off with this? This is like different than what I expected. Just kind of breaking your expectation and then kind of filling that expectation with something completely new and completely different in a traditional familiar space is, I think, really fascinating, really draws your eye in.
Yeah, you strike me as, so when I look at your work, you have a good grasp of how to tell a story while keeping that foundation in reality, and then also inspire those emotions and that set the tone, sort of set that really pleasant, relaxing vibe that maybe you would expect from a vacation, or, just going outside of your, civilized reality into nature or something. Yet you still maintain, like, one of your pieces has airport waiting room seats, I
Yeah.
believe, that sort of thing. I mean, there's there's something magical about it. So when you're approaching your art, how would you say that do you just kind of experiment, or do you have, what's your actual way of how do you conceptualize it? Like, how do you think about, do you have a goal, or?
So sometimes I start with the goal, but other times I just start experimenting and just kind of building out shapes and initially just blocking out a scene and just kind of seeing what works and what doesn't work. I have a background in photography originally, so I sometimes will look at reference images, some of my own work, to get inspired. Like recently I made a piece that was inspired by hiking in the south of France. There's this really beautiful national park that's right along the water there, and you kind of have these little inlets, which are basically like your own private pool, which is.
Do you know which town that park was near? I was recently in the south of France, so.
Oh yeah, Marseille. If you heard of that.
Marseille. Oh yeah, I never actually went, but I do want to go to France again.
It's gorgeous, that whole area. So it's the Calonge National Park. It's this amazing place that just stretches for miles, and you can just kind of go running in and out of these inlets. But yeah, so I'm inspired by the real, and like I'll oftentimes return to real photos just to, again, kind of ground myself in reality, just to make sure that I'm actually making shapes and forms that make sense. It's not just kind of this smattering of randomness, but there is some kind of realness to it. But yeah, just experimenting and not really having a direction is often leads to interesting results that I wouldn't have anticipated starting out. And there's lots of unused projects that I'll start and that I won't finish, but then I'll come back to later and then revisit with a fresh eye and a different approach, and maybe be able to finagle something to create a cool piece by the end.
Do you start with a constraint of any kind typically?
So I sometimes would like to think of either starting with just a room or with a more expansive scenes. Sometimes I'll start with just like creating a simple block out of an apartment room or a waiting room or something. Other times I'll just start blocking out a larger geographic scene. So I'll create like a mountain or a river or something like that, and kind of work off of that. So I guess those are the two constraints, whether it be like a large scale feature or something more that you're looking out upon, something from a more confined space. And just kind of bridging those two worlds is sometimes interesting too. So sometimes there'll be photos where you'll have this large scene in the background, but it's connected via like a river or interesting forest path or something back to a simple room where there's just a chair or something in the scene for scale. I find the use of scale very important in a lot of my photos, because it could be just the miniature scene that you're looking at, or it could be something that's much larger than life. And kind of having these simple objects like a stool or a bed or a chair that you're familiar with that you see millions of times in your life, it's interesting to kind of juxtapose that with this crazy otherworldliness of it. So
yeah, it seems to have that effect. I'm an artist myself, and I think that's kind of where I often envisioned my art, but I think I often got stuck in the abstract. Maybe it's because it can be, I'm going to say it can be easier.
Yeah.
If you're like, oh, I'm going to play with, this white plane and do an interesting form with subtle lighting, then you could spend a day on that if you have experience with the software or tools, and make a perfectly fine piece and be done with it, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole different challenge to build a realistic world that's, so it's almost like when I sat down to create something, I would get stuck in that, I think subconsciously I was intimidated by the idea of creating, a world. However, I did do a fairly surreal piece. Well, I didn't do a surreal piece. I actually did a realistic piece. I did it was like some skinny dipping. There was no nudity, but it was implied, because I had this memory of when I lived in Alaska and I went with some friends and skinny dipped in this lake in the mountains. And I had this memory of it, and I was like, I kind of want to commemorate that. So I did it in CGI, and it ended up looking pretty real. I mean, most people I shared it with, they just thought it was a photo.
Yeah.
And
I
I
feel like
just
that's
went
the
pretty
biggest praise when
realistic to
someone
it.
thinks that something is a real photo that's actually CGI. That's like peak
Oh, wait,
praise.
sorry. What was the beginning of that sentence?
Oh, I think it's like the peak praise when you get someone saying, "Oh, that looks like a real photo," and then it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, that's actually completely.
Yeah. Well, I think that's part of what you accomplish whenever you're grounding things in that with that realistic, piece of furniture or anything is that part. It's part of what you need, something that's actually to scale, a
Yeah.
reference point, and I think that's a big lesson there for any artist, and art in general as far as taste goes is interesting because I think it's super subjective. And I think that I have always gravitated toward the surreal. And I wonder if there's any, I don't know. Do you think there's any reason why someone might gravitate toward the surreal?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just that it's not what you'd expect. It's something that seems so familiar, but there's just such a twist to it, and it just kind of messes with your mind because we're just so used. Our brains are so used to just kind of creating meaning from something that you're looking at and making it make sense to you based on previous knowledge that you've acquired throughout your experiences on Earth. But then when you
Mm,
see something that's just almost exactly like what you'd imagine it, but there's just that little twist to it, I think that's what really is what makes it so fascinating and so appealing to us
mm,
humans to see that there's like little subtle twist, or sometimes not even subtle. It's kind of more intense, more
mm.
strange, kind of push to the surreal. But
So are you similar to me at all in that, okay, so I tend to want to push myself outside of my comfort zone. Like I'm always moving. Any job I take, I want it to be challenging. I'm always pushing myself and I want to explore and try the next thing. Is that kind of, are you similar? Is
oh,
that
absolutely, yeah, yeah. I'm
okay?
I'm kind of this like I guess lifelong learner type mindset where there's
Mm,
always I think ways to improve on whatever you're doing, whatever your craft is, and new fields to branch into consistently. So I mean, this isn't my full-time job, the stuff you see on my Instagram. So outside of my work, I like to kind of just keep pushing myself to learn new software, kind of
right.
include new things into my workflow, and just grow as an artist. Just interact with other people, kind of see how they're approaching the craft, and then incorporating their styles or some of their tips into my own work, and then growing that way. Yeah, I'm always trying to push myself to get better, and that challenge is what's so exciting. I think just constantly having places to improve is a blessing in a way because you're never going to get complacent. There's always going to be this way to push your craft in new directions and keep making pieces that are better and better and better. And if you finally find your style, which I finally feel like I am finding a style of sorts, you can really just kind of keep iterating on that and just trying
Mm,
things consistently.
that's fantastic. So, because that can take a while as an artist. I mean, however, I will say I thought I found my style a few times.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah,
Yeah, you'll find your blue period eventually, maybe. Or who knows? Maybe
yeah,
this is it.
yeah. Like I said, I started with photography, so that was what I did for a number of years. That's kind of how I initially built a following on Instagram and doing some of these composites with
Right.
some photos with other images, and then I just kind of now that this quarantine happened, I wasn't able
Also,
to
some of
go.
that work is composites.
What's
Some
that?
of the work on your Instagram is composites.
From more so like a year or two ago.
Oh, okay.
Within the past, I guess, like year, I've been basically almost entirely CGI with some of my photos interspersed in there. Um,
Okay. What about that one with the yellow flowers in the field and the blue sky and there's a gray cloud?
yeah, that's entirely CGI.
Damn, dude. So that one I saw and I was like, oh, that must be one of the composites.
Yeah,
Okay. Nice.
yeah. So like all the recent works, I think up until like maybe I don't know August of last year are primarily CGI with a couple photos interspersed in there when I was able to get out to take pictures, which I really do like to do. I think I find a lot of inspiration by just going on photo walks. So if I just go out and walk around and just kind of see how light is hitting different things, and I mean that's a lot of what CGI is you're trying to capture the real life in a way, and it's so easy to just get totally off and have the lighting look too flat or objects look
Mm.
just unnatural. And when I kind of feel myself in my
Andre
creative block,
Lebrov does that a lot too. You know who I'm talking about? The guy who
who is it?
does Andre Lebrov.
Oh yeah, yeah,
He
yeah,
does that a lot too. He talks about how he walks and observes the shading and texture of things, and he
yeah.
makes it he makes a point to go on a little walk you know, and sometimes that's where he'll take photos for his textures and stuff.
Yeah, right. I've been getting more into like the photo scans recently too. But yeah, you just appreciate the world in such a different way. Like I think when I really start to dial into CGI, just looking outside, you just see light in such a different way. And you just see how it hits surfaces. Like leaves are, you think, when you think of a leaf, you think of this thing that's like completely opaque. But then there's just the way the light hits it. There's this backlight, there's this translucency to it. It's just, you start to see
Subsurface scattering.
shapes. Yeah, exactly. Subsurface scattering. You start to see shapes and light and color in such a different way.
Yeah. Well, now I look at the sky sometimes. Now that, you know, I've, you know, done some art and CGI and stuff and photography and all that too. I look at the sky sometimes and I go, what, you know, whoa, like I have not seen that shade of color in the sky before. I have not seen it light up the clouds in that way before. And it really gives me greater appreciation, I think, for observing the world. Or even right now, the sunlight's coming in.
I know, I just noticed as you were saying that, like it started to glow. It's perfect.
Look at that.
Yeah. Yeah, so, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, just stuff like that. And I'm going, wow. You know?
Yeah. And I'll do that sometimes. I'll do like photo studies where I'll just even just drawing stuff out too with like a digital tablet or something, just to kind of see how I envision colors. Because when you think of the sky, you think of like one color. You're like, oh, the sky is blue, but it's like so many different shades of color that contribute to that. And when you start to kind of realize that and look at it a totally different way, it's really mind blowing. And that has kind of been trying to bleed a bit more into my work and trying to capture all of those differences, all of the irregularities that we just kind of take for granted in a way.
You know what that makes me think of? So you're talking about all the shades of color that you notice. And to your point, you know, when you pay attention to it, you really do notice colors that you would have never noticed before. I almost wonder if we as artists, it's almost like we're on some kind of psychedelic drug just by being like looking at the world that way. Because people will, you know, take psilocybin or something and they will report back like, oh, I found this new color. You know, I saw these new colors in the sky, and they'll also say like they sense new emotions from people and things like that. And I wonder if simply by trying to recreate things, you actually learn more about their nature. It's fascinating.
Yeah, you really do. I mean, it's just so complex. Thinking like even something as simple as a rock, just trying to make a rock in 3D. It's just like, oh, it's simple. Just, I don't know, bend something a little bit, slap a texture on there. But there's just so much little details, little crevices, little bumps and ridges that you just don't even think about. But then when you're actually doing it, it's like, wow, okay, this is.
I'm working on a lobster right now.
What's that?
I'm working on a lobster that I'm going to have close-up shots of.
Yeah.
That's going to be, that's a doozy.
Yeah, that's why I have such a great appreciation for all the people who are just amazing sculptors and modelers. I don't kind of venture into that as much. I guess the extent to which I do that is just landscape scenes, maybe deforming terrain or making some models and objects from my scenes. But it's just, it's such an art to kind of be able to capture the world. And sculptors as well, real sculptors. I mean, if you look at these amazing things, the way they're able to show softness, like someone grabbing a pillow or something with a sculpted rock, it's just crazy. I mean, you think about the detail that goes into that, and it just really blows your mind.
Yeah, are you familiar with, what's his name? Fabio Viale. He's in Italy. Some of his statues have like tattoos painted on them.
Okay.
He does, and he did a leather glove that's made out of black marble.
That's insane.
You know, stuff like that. And I saw that leather glove at first, and I go, "Oh, that's real. That's a leather glove. Why did he post it?" Nope, that's a giant statue of a leather glove.
And I think
somehow looks like leather.
Real. And like why we're drawn to it, because it is these things that we think are one thing. Like you think it's a leather glove, but it's this completely different thing. And I think that's where something just switches in our mind. It's like, wow, that is just not what I expected. And it's incredible that someone's able to pull that off and make it look like what I expected. Yeah,
it does seem it's some people like it more than others. I have met people that they see the surreal and they're uncomfortable. You know, and actually it could be that I see the surreal and I'm uncomfortable, but I like to be that kind of uncomfortable. Yeah. It's like when your favorite character in a movie who's supposedly the protagonist turns out to be this really, you know, evil person that tricked everyone. And it's like, oh, you know, it hurts, but it's also the most interesting thing that could have happened. So that's, I found that's a huge part of my personality as someone who likes to explore, try new things. And it, you know, and for a while I thought I like trying new things and experiencing the surreal and all the, above, because I like to find the best thing. But then I realized the exploration itself, I think, is what is most interesting.
Yeah.
Because like with food, for example, I cook a lot, and I worked as a line cook, and I'm really into food. And for a while, I was especially after working as a line cook, I was on a path to, okay, here's the right way to do things. Like, here's the French way to make this sauce, and and just making sure I was doing things in the right way, and even telling people this is the right way. And what I realized was the most amazing part of eating, cooking, all that stuff was actually trying something new. That was where I oh, this is the beauty of it. Actually taking that French sauce and flipping it on its head. I mean, the best example, I don't know if you cook at all, but are you familiar with béarnaise sauce?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's one of my favorite sauces. I love steak, and so to have it with a nice béarnaise, it's traditionally made with shallots, white vinegar, peppercorns, and tarragon. And I had been doing some research for a post for some content about the similarities between tarragon, licorice, basil, and why there's some similarities between the flavors of tarragon and licorice. And I realized that there's actually a compound that they share. And so it's supposed that that's why they actually have, and so once I discovered, there's, molecularly something that, or maybe cellularly, something that actually makes those taste similar, then I realized, why not put basil in the béarnaise instead? Because I looked in 2 grocery stores, could not find béarnaise, or could not find tarragon, and I needed to make tarragon that night for a dish I was making, and threw some basil in there. And now it turns out I like basil béarnaise way better than traditional béarnaise. And most people would be appalled who learns that in culinary school. You use basil? That's, not right at all. And the fact that it's different almost made it better. It worked. And by having that little seed of discovery that there's some similarities between those herbs, I thought to do something different. And now I think it's better than the traditional. So anyway, a little bit of a rabbit trail there, but I think there's
that's awesome. Yeah, that's definitely very true. Exploration kind of leads to interesting new discoveries like that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you work for NASA.
Yeah.
So what do you do at NASA?
Yeah, so I'm at the intersection of the science and creative. So I have a background in geophysics. That's what I majored in undergrad, but I've always been in love with film and animation. So at NASA, I'm able to merge both of those. So I work as a planetary science video producer and animator. So I make a lot of videos and visualizations that promote our missions, that explain the crazy science, the frontier breaking science to you, the public, show you our new discoveries in interesting ways. But not only that, to kind of engage you and to get you interested in what we're doing as well, too, and to make sure that you're aware that your taxpayer dollars are being put to good use, and this really interesting research is cutting edge and advancing just humanity as a whole. So it's really inspiring work, and the stuff I'm able to do is just so fun to be able to communicate the science in new and creative ways to the public.
And I just realized that, space exploration is actually very on topic, because that's the ultimate exploration in a way.
Pushing your humans. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean it blows my mind anytime I think about, wow, we've made it to space, and in my lifetime we could potentially make it to Mars and even settle some of and that's mind blowing to me. I mean, I can't imagine what discoveries are going to come out of that. Has that been pretty cool to be a part of that?
Yeah, Mars is one of the missions that I work on as part of Planetary. And it's crazy to think about all that's going into it preparation wise, and then just all of the unknowns as well. I mean, there's just so much left to discover, and just beyond our lifetimes too, there's just so much out there. And that's something that's always hard to grapple with, is that there's all these things that will, just because of the nature of their distance, I mean, they're light years away, we'll never be able to get a probe or something out there to explore these far reaches of the universe. And so there's just so many vast regions of space that we need to explore, and just thinking about that and trying to fathom our place and how insignificant we are.
Yeah.
The larger scale of everything is always something that's kind of crazy to think about. And then just to be bottling that essence into like a 3-minute video, it's always a really tricky task to do. But it's
You're
such
almost
a fun
deciding what you're having to pull. Okay, what's actually important out of this infinite? That's interesting.
Yeah, so working with that every single time it's pretty insane to think about, and it's really cool too. I mean, I just love the science as well, and it's an art in itself to kind of be able to translate just the jargon of science. I mean, science is oftentimes very technical, especially among specialists in this field. I mean, we're initially presented with a research paper at the beginning of every one of our projects, and those are always just catered to their audience, which is the people who are specialists, the people who are researchers on that particular topic. So they're very clued into the terminology, all of the equations, all the graphs,
Mm-hmm.
figures that kind of are associated with that research topic. And if you were to present that to the public, it sounds like a foreign language. It's just
You're
totally,
the translator,
in a
essentially.
way, yeah, exactly. So I mean, it's tough for the scientists to explain the results to the public oftentimes because of that block, because they're so used to working in that space that when they're just trying to present that in just layman's terms and keep it interesting, it's really challenging. So that's where we kind of swoop in and help them explain visually, oftentimes, what is going on, what the research means, and how it's significant, how it's going to impact you, the public,
Mm.
even if it's a discovery from another planetary system. How does that have some impact on the average person's life?
Yeah. So, what is a discovery that has happened that was amazing, and all these scientists were excited about it, and you were excited about it, and everyone that understood it was excited about it, but it was very difficult to communicate to the public how amazing the discovery was?
Yeah, actually, the very first project I worked on at NASA was this way. There's the discovery of something at Mars called sporadic E. There are these interesting layers in the atmosphere there, the ionosphere, that basically deflect particles that are coming in kind of bizarre ways that we actually experience it at Earth, but we didn't know that that was what we were experiencing because they're at this place in the atmosphere that's really hard to reach. It's above where we're able to put weather balloons, and it's also only explored just briefly by rockets, sounding rockets that we send up. So it's something that we almost know nothing about. But by kind of researching it in this laboratory at Mars, we were able to understand its impacts on radio transmissions at Earth. So they actually, if you ever get this kind of weird staticky noise when you're listening to a radio transmission, a lot of times it's actually from some other station just really far away that's been bounced off of these layers that kind of form an unpredictable location.
Oh,
Now
so
we're
is that
actually
what people previously thought was the sound of the universe?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, there's all kinds of
That
theories about it, and we've narrowed it down to these layers that form in the ionosphere, these kind of charged concentrations of particles that kind of snap up just in random locations and bounce things around, and kind of understanding where those form and why they form where they do is able to help us learn
Wait,
more
so is
about.
that the noise, or is it the like audible, like you can tell it's somee's voice or something? Or are you talking about the actual like fuzzy noise?
Yeah, it's both. So sometimes you'll be able to pick up another transmission from like over the mountains or somewhere really far away where you should be able to pick it up, but it's being bounced off these layers to you.
And what's
Um,
it called again?
Sporadic E.
Sporadic E.
Yeah. So when I was presented with this topic, I mean, the research for it is super technical. I mean, it's a lot of this really crazy electromagnetic particle theory that goes into it. And my approach actually to convert that to something that makes sense to the public is to take this kind of comic book approach to it. So if you ever saw the movie Spider-Verse, I was heavily inspired by that for the style of it.
Oh.
And I kind of made it this cartoon like zap, zoom, like all of those kind of sound effects into this thing where I was able to explain what was going on and how our spacecraft Maven, it's what it's called, I was able to fly through these things, directly sample them, and then transmit that information back to us at Earth to help better understand what's going on right above our heads all the time as we speak. So it
That's
was
cool.
really fun.
Does that mean anything for technological advancements, or do we know yet?
So more so, I guess, just for fixing things. So it really helps us a lot with defense and also with just your radar, with your radio and with radar communications as well, because these are signals that are often very much interfered with by sporadic E. So being able to predict where they form will definitely help us just better prepare ourselves for signal detection from far away and improve, I guess, radio as well in a way too. So it's more accurate and
So
picking
it's a
up.
lot of detecting, communications, that sort of thing, transmitting.
Yeah, a lot of communications application.
Okay, cool. Is there another one off the top of your head that's like some amazing discovery? Because that's really interesting that they discovered that the public didn't. Did the public end up understanding, or do you think they didn't?
Yeah, I mean, people responded very favorably to that video. They really loved the
Awesome.
bits of it and really engaged with it. Another one I can think of is the discovery of liquid water beneath the surface of the south pole of the moon. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we're going to the south pole of the moon, is because we're planning on harvesting that water to use for fuel, to use for drinking water for astronauts. And it's something, I mean, if you look at the moon, it looks desolate. It's this rock in space with just tons and tons of craters, but it harbors a lot of resources for us that we could use. And being able to get something up there to be able to convert that H2O into hydrogen to use for fuel it's a pretty fascinating thing to think about. So communicating that to the public, I just made a video recently about this, all about the training that we do for astronauts for when they get there, to be able to actually access these resources and understand what rocks they're looking at, and understand which ones might have some of these resources in them, how to access these resources, how to take these samples, and how to advance the science. And one of the crazy things about all our missions is the foresight for each one too. I mean, with the Apollo mission, they saved a lot of those samples that they got from the moon for 50 years, knowing that technology was going to improve over that time, before they reopened the samples to look at them again. So I work with a group of people who are analyzing samples from the Apollo mission from the late 60s, early 70s, with the modern technology. And the stuff they're learning now is just far surpassing our knowledge anywhere close to what we were able to do back in the 60s, 70s. And now just to think about 50 years from now, when we're getting samples back, or opening samples that we're going to be getting back from the next moon missions and next Mars mission, and looking at these things, I can't even imagine what technology is going to be like in 50 years. So it's really cool to think about that kind of stuff too, and just all of the foresight that each one of these missions has. So.
Wow. Do you know how long it's going to be before we're going to live on another planet? Or does anyone have any guesses?
I mean, we're pretty ambitious with our plans. I mean, currently as it stands, we're trying to get it to a sustainable presence on the moon by like the late 20s, early 30s, I guess. And then from there, we're using that as a launch pad to get to Mars and beyond. So, I mean, ambitiously, it's pretty soon that a lot of this stuff is going to be possible. So it's exciting to kind of see what happens. And now with a lot more private companies investing in space travel too, that kind of advances it a bit more and makes space a bit more open to the public, as opposed to just a lot of these groups like NASA or the European Space Agency. It's more of a public thing now, that you can kind of have a stake in it. You can invest in these companies and be able to access space yourself, and it's really cool.
Yeah.
Very soon.
That's fascinating too, because there may be some of the first biggest things expeditions could potentially be like, you know, funded by someone who wants to come along for the ride. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I'll pay $1 billion to be on basically a cruise ship in space. You know, that I think that could happen. I mean, I don't know about you, but
it's definitely something that's possible. And I'm on another mission that's about to sample an asteroid in a couple months. And there's this whole discussion about asteroid mining for resources. I mean, there's just tons of really valuable rocks and minerals on a lot of these places. And there's going to be having probably some new legislation for space soon. I know there's some laws for our ownership of Antarctica and kind of how that's divvied up amongst all the different continents of the world, countries of the world. For space, I mean, once we start moving out and making it a bit more commercial, it's going to be interesting to kind of see how we set up, I guess, laws to govern space in a way, if that's possible.
Where we put the McDonald's and Starbucks.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, it's going to be a lot of interesting things. I mean, we're advancing so quickly as a human race that it's kind of crazy to see the amount of improvements that we can make over such a quick amount of time. And we're living right in the hotspot of all this as it's so it's cool to be ground zero where it's happening at NASA. I started right at the 50th anniversary of the Apollo mission, and looking back and then looking forward, it's really exciting to see all the progress that's possible. So
yeah, I can't imagine. Was that something that you fantasized as a kid about at all?
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I always wanted to be a pilot growing up. That was like my first job I wanted to do. So I always loved the idea of going out and exploring the unknown, going out to uncharted territories, up into space even. As I got older, I realized that was terrifying, and the idea of it's pretty scary. But I mean, it's something that's always fascinating. I mean, if you just think about it, it's not something that you access on a daily basis. Like, you're not going up into space usually, I assume, on a daily basis, but it's something that's always existing all around you. And
it's very brave to be one of the first people to go into unknown territory. I mean, it seems like even though we've been in space before, they're always trying out new methods and new technologies. So even though it's gotten statistically safer, you're still kind of doing something for the first time in a way as an astronaut. So yeah, I think a parallel for me would be as a teenager, I used to think, oh, maybe I'll join the military at some point. That's interesting to me. And then I realized the more I created and the more I, explored the world, I was like, man, I really want to live. I really, so it's amazing to me the bravery it takes to go, I'm going to put that aside, put aside like how nice it is to just exist in a, safe world and, apply that bravery toward a higher purpose. And I don't think it's me anymore, but I really respect the people that make that decision because I mean, now it's definitely scary to think about those life-threatening situations. And
Yeah. I mean, also if you think about the first Apollo mission, Apollo 11, it was flown on like I think 4 kilobytes of RAM or something like, and more powerful than a calculator. It's just kind of crazy to think about the amount of trust that those astronauts put in the machinery that was just so primitive by today's standards to get them to.
And that's where they had the little rings or whatever that would function as switches, sort of.
Yeah, just all the buttons and stuff, and it's crazy the amount of just trust that they had in their machinery and just how brave they were to take that risk to make it happen.
Yeah, it's insane. What are you excited about most? Like when you go to work every day, what excites you the most? Is there some dream that you have, some fantasy of space travel that you have, or?
Yeah, I guess being so close to the science and just seeing where we're going and how we're getting there. And I'm just always really inspired and just kind of blown away by the attention to detail that a lot of these scientists and engineers have for every single one of their missions. I mean, they've thought of literally everything and just pushing the frontiers and exploring deeper into space and being there for that discovery when that amazing thing happens is always really cool. And there's always just so much buzz and excitement. And it's like we have this big event in a couple months for one of the missions where we're going to be trying to sample this asteroid. And it's just the amount of anticipation. It's almost something out of like a Hollywood movie, and just having it actually be a real thing that you're experiencing live with all these other people. It's just always exhilarating to be there, and the anticipation, the stress of watching these things happen, that risk of failure, the drive for success is always just awesome to be just motivated every day to do that. And just the work we're doing, I mean, it's touching so many different lives. I mean, we're constantly making these products that everyone can engage with. And I definitely, all my family, they're educators, and I kind of have that in a way with my work. I want people to be inspired. I want people to engage with science no matter what their discipline is in life. It's, I think, super important to be able to understand the natural world. And a lot of the videos, we make every single one of our videos public domain for everyone to download and use. So it always makes my day when I get a message from a teacher or someone who's seen my work and used it for their classroom and inspired their students. And it's just really exciting to be able to have that access and that educational aspect of my job in addition to the work that we're already doing. It's really inspiring, and it's exciting to see so many people younger than me getting engaged with it and just wanting to do science.
Yeah, power of the internet, right? Because people, whoever wants to learn about it, they have a rabbit hole they can go down, and whether they're interested in NASA, SpaceX, all that stuff can just kind of blend together and immerse them in that world. And I think that's amazing. I mean, I genuinely think that I don't even call it education necessarily, because I think we're going beyond education into an age of, and we already have to some extent, you can see with some younger generations, they'll refer to things that, like a black hole discovery that happened earlier that day, and then they'll be just because they saw it on social media or something, and then they have at their fingertips, they're just gonna look it up because that's what they do. I mean, my youngest sister's like that. She will see a meme about something related to a scientific discovery, whether it's the black hole. When was that? It was was that last year?
Yeah.
Something like that, and just the next minute she's on Wikipedia or whatever on YouTube, and she has all this access, and it's just like second nature.
That's awesome to hear. I'm glad that's becoming such a great thing.
Right. Well, the interesting thing is she doesn't seem to show a specific interest in space travel or anything, but it's with any of these topics, like it's just becoming second nature to humans, I think, to go, oh, like the internet is an extension of us almost.
Right.
So
Yeah.
you don't have to go, oh, I learned this thing in school, so therefore I understand it. That's helpful if you work in that field, obviously. But the fact that you have access to all this information, I think it's really changing how we see the world for sure. Like, for example, this flower, I was like, oh, I should probably look up what that is just in case, he asks what that is. And
Yeah,
I
I've
already
noticed that way. It looks cool. It's like kind of almost like a torture thing, like a
yeah, like something out of mist or something.
yeah.
It's called a pink quill,
Okay.
I think, or a bromeliad. Anyway, the fact that, let's say 30 years ago, you would have never known what that was called, right?
Yeah.
You would have had to, maybe if you had a neighbor that knew plants, they'd be able to tell you, that's that plant. But, if you just try a little bit, you could say weird flower that's flat with, and then you'll be able to figure out what the name is and go down that rabbit trail. If you hear there's a new black hole discovered, you can Google black hole and you'll get, however many results. And to me, that's amazing. I mean, I think that's truly changing. It's going to change what interest, like someone who might have never wanted to become a scientist because of the small town they grew up in that maybe didn't have resources that would have led them to that. Now, maybe at a young age, they go, oh, that's amazing. And suddenly they go down that path. And that's fantastic, I think.
Yeah, for sure. At the
So
same
it
time,
feels,
there's also a lot of
oh,
noise. It's tough to break through to make sure that you're providing quality content. And we're always trying to innovate with what we're doing. And I want to make stuff that's accessible for people. And I mean, NASA has been around for 60 years. So it's when you think about it, it's like an old company by some standards, but we're still kind of pushing the boundaries and staying relevant. And a lot of the stuff I'm trying to do now is breaking more into those new areas like AR, VR, 360, just to make our content even more immersive. We have this data that we can share in new and innovative ways, and it's just making sure that we can get that out to the public to engage with in new and cool ways is always exciting to do, just to stay relevant and provide our
yeah, that's really exciting. I look forward to seeing that. So hypothetically, they'd be wearing like the VR goggles and then, or just as simple as an app.
Yeah.
They're doing something, AR, augmented reality, based on like their environment, maybe like floating things inside
Yeah,
their
like you can place
environment.
a planet or a spacecraft or something in your environment. You can spin around it. You can walk around it, click on different parts of it
Oh,
on your
sweet.
screen, and bring up some information or narration or something about what you're seeing. With VR, we could plant you on one of these worlds, like an asteroid or a planet, and have the real imagery be influencing the terrain that you're seeing. You can walk around your surroundings and look at things as if you're like a rover on Mars or something, or
That's awesome.
walking around on an asteroid.
So the elephant in the room is that some people are listening and they read somewhere, someone told them, hey, maybe the moon landing was fake. So they hear your job, and then maybe they think, oh yeah, there's the guy that, maybe his colleague is. So that's kind of interesting. Do you ever get people talking to you about that? Like, oh, nice CGI. Like, no wonder the moon landing looks so good.
Constantly, yeah. Every single video we post, especially moon-related ones, we get just a flurry of those types of comments. I mean, I can tell you that is definitely a very real thing. You can look with the telescope and see where we landed on the moon. So it's a real thing. But we definitely get a lot of comments like that. I mean, there's always conspiracy theories, but
Oh yeah.
yeah,
No, of course. Yeah, of course it's real.
Sure.
I just it's funny, that seems like something people would go to just because, you do CGI and then you work for NASA, put two and two together, So
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there are stuff that we do have to create entirely CGI images for, but it's always based off the real science, the real data. I mean, it's the same way that we create a lot of these amazing images of faraway galaxies and stuff. I mean, an image is composed of a lot of this data that we're kind of combining together.
So in a sense, it's like a camera. Like a camera takes in color information and light information, and then it renders an image, and then you view that image on a screen, but it was taking data essentially into sensors and assembling it. So your team is sort of like a camera sensor in a way that's assembling things into this final image.
That's a really good way of phrasing it. Yeah, I mean, we always are based off the science, and it's always going back to make sure that we're telling the right story, we're telling the right interpretation of the data. And yeah, it's definitely a translation point that we're always operating at, just between the science and the public, to make sure that we're accurately telling the story using all of our possible resources, and telling it in a compelling and creative way too is always nice if we can kind of tack that in with our products.
Yeah. Sweet. So it feels weird to talk about your art after we just talked about space travel.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, how much does your work with NASA influence your, artist, your personal work that you share online?
Yeah, I think just seeing the crazy different colors on other worlds. I mean, we see these amazing images of like Enceladus or Europa, these vibrant moons of Saturn and Jupiter. And just kind of translating those saturated colors into my own work is always really exciting. And imagining what these worlds might be like. I always kind of go back to these JPL travel posters from a couple years back where they made these interpretations of what it would be like, kind of in the style of those vintage national park posters, what these worlds would look like. This is a really beautiful series. I encourage you to check it out.
JPL, let me just look it up real quick so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. They're
JPL, what?
Visually for people who are listening. It's these really interesting kind of creative approaches, putting people in the environments of these moons or exoplanets to show what it'd be like, kind of playing on some of the tropes of those planets, like, I don't know, the thick, dense atmospheres.
Oh, are these the ones that look like posters?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I've seen those.
Yeah, so
those are gorgeous.
I'm always inspired by those really interesting takes on these distant worlds that we can really, at least for right now, only imagine what they'd be like if we were able to put feet on our own feet on the ground there. And just trying to translate that into my own work is always really exciting to do, and kind of think about visualizing these faraway worlds. And yeah, I mean, I also a lot of my artwork is my experimentations to improve as an artist and then apply those skills back to my own work for NASA too. So I'm always trying to, as we were talking about earlier, grow my skill set and just apply new software to my workflow. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the work I do for Instagram is kind of ways for me to just keep broadening that skill set and engaging in new ways. I got very into 3D recently, and that's definitely a lot of the work I do in NASA is now all in 3D. So it's really useful to experiment in both different ways to try to see how I can grow.
Are you selling prints?
I am, yeah. I do have a lot of my work available up on prints, Paris prints.
That's awesome. Okay, yeah, I'll have to get one of those.
Awesome.
Do you have that cloud and Gothic windows up yet?
I do, yeah. Or there's one I do have with the cloud. If I don't have that one already, I can put it up.
Okay. That'd be great because I love that. I'm in love with that one. But
that's awesome. Yeah, I'll try to make that available. and any other ones too.
Yeah, and I see that. Is your website the best place to go to, or your Instagram?
Yeah, so it's linked from my Instagram. On my bio, there's like a link tree thing, and if you go from there, there's a bunch of different links, and one takes you to all the prints that are available on my website.
Okay, cool. Again, that's James_films is his Instagram. Cool, man. Again, your work is really intense and awesome. I love your use of sunlight. I think that's a really tricky thing to do accurately. And I've noticed like, unless you're really looking at reality and paying attention to how sunlight affects the world, it can be one of those things where it'll tell you. I mean, the lighting, there's a lot of people who do CGI work out there, and what kills them is the lighting.
Yeah.
They might have realistic textures and models and everything, but they don't have the lighting down, so the whole thing just ends up looking fake. But it seems like you have that down pretty good. So
yeah, I think that partially comes from my photography as well, the photo walks and stuff. I mean, just kind of seeing how light hits things. My two favorite times of day are sunrise and sunset, just because the angle of the light is just stunning, and it's for that brief moment that it hits in just the right spot. I'm always trying to capture that with my work.
Got some nice pretty sunlight.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, just the way it cascades and hits things in really just dramatic shadow and contrast. I took a theater class in college with a person who works for a lot of Broadway plays and stuff, and one of the things that she said that really stuck with me is contrast equals interest. So kind of having this contrast between, for my work, nature and the built environment, or dark and light with the light and shadow. I like to make these spaces where your eye is drawn through the frame and kind of tells the story as you take in and process more of the image.
What I often say is interesting shadows, or shadows and interesting lighting makes life a little bit less boring.
Yeah.
And I had a bad photography teacher once that told me, he said, ambient lighting is the best because then your subject is fully lit. And so for a while, when I first started shooting photos, I would try to light in the most ambient setting. But what happened is there was no story, there was no
Yeah,
romance, there was no, because
wow,
everything would just be fully lit, but
right.
there's no intrigue there. But eventually, I killed that habit. But yeah, I mean, that's huge. You know, and I think that's part of why some art. I mean, I'm just being blunt. I think why some artists choose, even though there's amazing abstract art out there, like there truly is. But if you actually look at the historical abstract artists, a lot of times they started with realistic, you know, classical painting where they're doing accurate lighting, and then they graduated to a different style, and maybe they chose to do more abstract things. And I do think it's important for artists to understand the realistic in order to do something truly magical with the abstract, if they want to go that abstract route.
I think the best example of that merge is with impressionistic art. That's what I'm most inspired by, I think, because there is a sense of realness to it, but it's just this kind of flowing, just experimental view of what it is. And it's almost capturing this experience. It's real in the sense that it's something that happened to you. It's something that you experience, but it's fake, I guess, or pushing reality in that it's, if you're looking at it, it's not what it actually is in real life.
An example would be Starry Night.
Yeah, sure.
Right,
Or like a lot of the sunrise images that Claude Monet would paint. He would go back to the same spots and do these amazing studies over and over. He did this one study of a cathedral. He would go there every single day at different times of the day and paint the same exact location, but at different times of the day. And every one tells a story in that there's this sense of experience beyond just the physical location. Like there was a moment, there was a light, there was a person, there was this fleeting experience that you're able to capture in this still image.
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to do.
The fact is, by showing a stylistic depiction of reality or of a surreal world you're trying to show, you're actually showing people a little bit of your perception.
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
While one person might see the highlights of the sun on the ocean, maybe the other person was paying attention to the little shadows of the fish. And the two people may have been looking at the same exact thing, but you see that beauty of personal perception comes out, I think, with your style.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about because with musical artists, for example, they're often asked, why, what did you mean?
Yeah.
What did you mean by making that piece of art? And they're just like, well, that's the way I wanted to do it. Or that's or I want other people to find what they'll find out of it. And I find that so true typically with artists. Do you find that's true? Do you have an answer if someone were to ask you, like, what does that piece of art mean?
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that there's meaning for everything that I create. It's just I try to capture what I was feeling in that moment, and oftentimes, a lot of times, inspired by what I see outdoors or by works I see from, like I said, impressionistic art is definitely, I think, where I get most of my inspiration for my work. And yeah, it's
more the intangible in a way. It's
right.
It's a feeling.
Yeah, it's hard to describe. It's hard to put in words, and I guess that's where art kind of comes in to do the talking, do the rest of the work, and carry that extra step. But yeah, it's tough to put in words, and that's, I guess, where I try to create is that experience and capture that visually.
Awesome. Yep. Well, thanks a lot for coming on, man. Again, I'm just gonna go ahead and say your Instagram again. So your Instagram, James's Instagram is James_films. His website is jamestralie.com. And anything else? Is there anywhere else people should look to find it?
The two main locations, yeah. Or you can look on our YouTube channel, NASA Goddard. We've got a lot of great videos there if you're interested in seeing more of the space angle of our work.
NASA Goddard.
Yeah.
That's the account. Okay, cool. Great. Awesome, man.
But yeah, this is a really great conversation. Thanks so much for having me on.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for coming. This was really interesting. And I would love to welcome you back again another time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm planning on having some chefs on here. I've had an interview with a makeup artist, a luxury innkeeper from Hawaii. How would you describe yourself as at NASA? What would you call your job?
Yeah, I'm a producer and animator.
Producer and animator. Okay, so a NASA producer and animator and artist. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty wide gamut, but I'm sure there'll be a space to talk more about this awesome stuff. And
That'd be
maybe you
great.
could
Yeah.
give
Love
us some
to.
more info on a new space discovery at that point. Because
Yeah,
yeah,
hoping
I had never heard
for.
about the damn, what's it called? The bouncing around the atmosphere.
Oh yeah, sporadic E.
Sporadic E. I didn't know that that was a thing. So that's
Yeah, I
really
encourage you to check out the video for it too. It's really kind of a fun, nifty comic book style of animation. It's been starting to make it around the film festival circuit, so it's a fun one.
Okay, and just one last thing. Do you have a favorite? What's your guilty pleasure food?
For food, probably mousse au chocolat. I love chocolate mousse.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the fluffy, the airiness.
Where do you get it?
I spent a lot of time in France. I'm actually from French background, so there's a lot of places in and around the south of France that have some really amazing mousse au chocolat.
I don't think I had mousse while I was there.
Yeah, it's good. That is always good. And then I'm trying to think.
Is it chocolatier than the U.S. stuff?
Yeah, well, also the chocolate is real there. Like there's a lot of really strict regulations on the amount of cocoa that you have in chocolate. Like it has to be a certain percent cocoa, whereas here, like Hershey's, it's like almost nothing. It's totally artificial. In France, it's all real, and like the flavors are just so much better. So different from here in America. Like just in general, quality across the board for food, it's just so much better regulated. So the flavor is always so much better. I think not a matter of size of the portions too. Like the quality is so vastly outweighs the quantity. So like you'll have these smaller portions, but just the flavor is just insane with everyone. Yeah, that's always something.
Yeah, you have me salivating. That sounds really good.
Yeah, and a really good paella as well in Spain and south of France too, as well, with all the seafood.
Now, did you find that the paella that you ate in Spain had the chocolat, the crispy, or did they not always do that?
I don't think it's universal to do it. Yeah, I had more in.
Because when I had it in Monaco, they didn't have the crispy. It was a very light. They had tons of seafood in there, and I was like, man, everyone like Bobby Flay. His opinion is that it's not real paella unless there's that crispy chocolat. But what I'm finding is it seems like that might be regional. Like
yeah. The one I had was definitely lighter. It didn't have as much of the crispiness, but yeah.
Anyway, I could talk about food for hours. But
that's good stuff. I love it. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, we should take a tour of France and Monaco and Italy someday, and you can show me Mousse, and I'll show you the hidden secrets I found. There's a really good seafood paella in Monaco. Although there's not that many restaurants in Monaco, so you could probably find it on your own. But still.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for coming, man. It was a great conversation, and hopefully I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Take it easy.
All right, let's see ya.